ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to FreightWaves Today. I'm your host, Malcolm Harris, alongside with my co-host, Zach Strickland. Zach, what's up, sir? How are you?
Yeah, back on it, man. 2 times in 1 week.
2 times. 2 times in 1 week. It's good to see you. You look great.
I don't feel quite as up to snuff because you stepped your game up.
Stop.
The show that I come on and you come out looking like this.
Listen, I got to represent Craig Fuller and Julie Vandekamp. They got the day to handle business, but we got you covered here. Of course, you guys may know me from What the Truck. I hope you do. If not, you should like and subscribe on all platforms. You know Zach from Freightonomics, but today, of course, we are all yours for the next 2 hours, and we are excited to be here.
Yeah, no, looking forward to it. It's a maintenance heavy day today. We're going to talk some equipment.
Got some equipment on the way. I mean, the road ahead is going to be absolutely incredible. 2 great guests, really 3 great guests. But on the road ahead, we've got Love's Brad Bournes. All right, he's going to be talking on how AI is turning fleet maintenance into a strategic advantage. Plus, Volvo Trucks' own Nicole Portello on how over-the-air software updates are keeping trucks current and fleets running longer without interruption. All right, so between Brad and Nicole, this first hour is going to be fantastic. But then, of course, on the back half of FreightWaves today, that's where my star player comes to shine. That's Mr. Zach Strickland. You're going to do your thing and, of course, break down the latest and greatest when it comes to everything happening in the industry and the space right now.
Yeah, on Freightonomics. So, yeah, and we'll have DJ Donahue.
Yeah.
Will be assisting me today. And big economic releases this week. Inflation.
Huge
Inflation's
stuff.
A big deal now.
Huge stuff happening. And the green is a color theme of the day, I've noticed.
Except for me.
We left you out of the chat, I guess, myself and DJ. Saw DJ earlier, had the great tie clip, and he was rocking the green. You guys are going to see this later on in the show today, but it's fantastic.
And you know, green is actually my color. Like I have green eyes.
Oh,
so,
you do?
Yeah.
I'm looking at them right now.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
wow.
I have a closet full of green and light blue too.
Green is my favorite color typically. My car is green, for those that don't know. I mean, but yeah, it's an exciting time, and it's going to be a great show. And of course, we got a lot to get to, all right, when it comes to all the different things happening in the space right now. But you know how we start FreightWaves today. Let's check it out with the Morning Minute.
We kick things off in a New Orleans courtroom where jury selection began Monday for a disbarred attorney accused of orchestrating the murder of a federal witness tied to a sprawling staged truck crash scheme. Prosecutors allege Sean Alfortish conspired to kill Cornelius Garrison, a so-called slammer, who intentionally sideswiped 18-wheelers and later began cooperating with the FBI. Someone fatally shot Garrison at his mother's home on September 22nd, 2020. Authorities charged Alfortish and Leon Parker with causing the witness's death through a firearm, an offense that carries potential life imprisonment and a $250,000 fine. The case is part of a massive federal probe that has charged 63 defendants in connection with an operation that ran from December 2011 through December 2024, where participants recruited passengers and paid drivers to target 18-wheelers carrying large commercial policies, then filed fraudulent lawsuits seeking insurance payouts. Over on the rails, a coalition of 7 Republican state attorneys general is urging the Surface Transportation Board to outright reject Union Pacific's proposed acquisition of Norfolk Southern. In a letter entered into the STB's public record on August 11th, the attorneys general argued that the railroads have not shown the transaction would serve the public interest or strengthen rail-to-rail competition. The coalition, led by Montana Attorney General Austin Knudsen and joined by officials from Iowa, Kansas, Florida, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Tennessee, took particular aim at the railroad's proposed committed gateway pricing arrangement, which they say would preserve only a narrow slice of existing competitive options while potentially raising rates for shippers. The states contend the pricing plan would apply to only 0.9% of U.S. rail traffic, with rates set at the 70th percentile of comparable traffic, meaning many eligible shippers could actually receive a higher price than they pay today. Finally, new Census Bureau data confirms Mexico's dominant position in U.S. trade, with implications reverberating through the nation's busiest cross-border freight gateway. Mexico retained its position as the United States' largest trading partner in June, with $89.2 billion in two-way commerce, ahead of Canada at $67.9 billion, and China at $34.7 billion. Laredo, Texas, remained the nation's busiest international trade gateway, handling a massive $36.5 billion in cross-border trade during the month, accounting for more than 1/3 of all U.S.-Mexico commerce. The port's performance highlights its critical role as the primary conduit for automotive parts, vehicles, machinery, electronics, and other manufactured goods moving between the two countries. As of Wednesday, the outbound tender rejection index for Laredo stood at 15.19%, compared to just 3.32% at the same time last year, potentially indicating tightening capacity or carriers rejecting contract freight in favor of better paying opportunities.
Again, another great morning minute. Some great information also that's available to you on social media. Shout out to Jessica Cregan for getting that all over socials, on our stories, on Instagram right now. Go check it out. Let's work our way backwards a little bit. Zach, talk to me a little bit about, is there any surprise about this Laredo kind of leading the pack here?
No, it is fascinating because we're under, they basically said that this USMCA is, we're not going to accept it into the 2042 or however long it was supposed to happen. It is fascinating that one of the tidbits here is that electronics has taken over automotive in terms of the most valuable freight moving across the border. So and again, we're in this AI data center build out phase of our existence in America. So Laredo having a boom, not shocking at all. Like, it's been the number one, it's actually a choke point. Yeah. If something goes wrong at Laredo, that's the majority of that freight moving across that border there. So there's a little small border crossings scattered throughout, but I guess they're probably not worried about lettuce right now going across the border.
I did have Taco Bell the other day, and I'm a bit nervous right now.
But there's obviously the majority of freight that crosses that border is electronics and automotive-centric stuff, and Laredo is, all that infrastructure, the bridge there is ginormous.
Yeah, it is ginormous. It is. It is. It's not shocking to me at all when I take a look at these, and just looking at the story as well. Yeah. And then also just knowing brokerage off the top of, my head is like, there's a lot of different operations that are neighboring Laredo, and that's not for any reason at all. I mean, obviously, wink, wink.
Well, they've got build-outs all across the border there, and that's been happening for years, like since the pandemic era. I don't know that that's, I've actually been trying to figure out if that's been stalled out anytime recently because of some of the trade policy stuff that people have gotten concerned about. But what is it, Ciudad Juarez, which is basically right across the border there, is just lined up with factories.
For sure. Yeah. I do not want to go into our next guest without talking about our first story. Yeah. Because they came in literally slamming, pun intended. This is crazy, man. I mean, the slammer, story is ridiculous to me. We've covered it, of course, with Mata and John Kingston having coverage about it. Whenever you saw this, it just, there's a gun involved, a death involved. I mean, this is bizarre.
You wouldn't think that this was like freight or transportation centric stuff. This is some Netflix documentary. Like, it's got some sort of like crime drama sitting on the back burners here. Yeah. Insane.
It's insane.
But you worked in brokerage for a while. I did. The stories that come out of this industry are some of the most insane.
No, for sure. And it's real life too. It's like, you think that this is a movie, but it's like, in reality, like, all right, like, these are things that are actually happening. And these are things in the space that are just not going to go away anytime soon. So, whenever I saw this, and obviously with Mata, like, it was somebody threw up at the trial. Somebody was, hollering in court. Like, there's different things. I mean, there's a pay for hitman. Like, this is a wild story. Phil Brinket does an excellent job. I know we just had the morning minute, but for those that can't get to your smartphone right now, check it out. After lunch or do it, whatever, just visit the website right now and check it out from Phil. A good work from him as well. So with that being said, it is time to get to our first guest. And I'm excited. Again, I want to introduce this guy. Just so you all know, of course, rising labor costs, parts inflation, and driver shortages have made maintenance one of the biggest cost pressures that fleets face today. And of course, joining us is going to be Brad Bournes. He's the manager of fleet maintenance and service at Love's Travel Stops and Country Stores. Brad, welcome to FreightWaves today. How are you?
Good afternoon. Good to see you guys. Thank you for having me on today. Looking forward to some riveting conversation about fleet maintenance.
Oh, of course, of course. It's good to have you here, and appreciate you making the time. I mean, I want to kind of jump right into it because there's obviously so much that's going on, and I want to really kind of put in perspective for our listeners. I mean, the challenges that I'm sure are being faced right now are second to none. But if you could just categorize it, what maintenance challenges are you hearing most from customers right now?
I think it would probably be easier to name what's not a challenge at this point. There are a lot of things out there, especially in fleet maintenance, but the most glaring is obviously the parts and labor, right? The increase. You look at the ATRI report for last year, we were up 8.6%. And that's been a trend, right? There was a little drop at the end of last year, but I think there was some noise in that with lower mileages ran, which is lower PMs, lower frequencies of maintenance events. But it's been a challenge really since post-COVID. It's been a dramatic increase in costs, and there's a lot of things driving that, obviously, with the labor shortage of technicians, all those things that we always talk about. But tariffs have driven a lot of that as well with parts pricing, and that's across the board, which really I think ties into my next point is, parts pricing is up with replacement parts, but also with new equipment. So a lot of fleets have extended trade cycles for that reason, as well as several others. But that's driving increased costs further down the road, more downtime, more friction with drivers. So it's a lot of collection of those things with all of the cost pressures. One of the other big things I see out there is we'll get to talk about hopefully some more today is just data in itself, right? There's no shortage of data in the industry right now, more than we've ever had, especially from the fleet maintenance side of the house. And it's incredibly challenging to digest, synthesize, analyze all that data. It's very, very tough for maintenance leaders, especially if they don't have the tools to do those things. And you look at historic software, what I'd call a system of record, and I think there's a real shift happening right now to system of intelligence to really give you the information that you need to make decisions.
Brad, go. No,
yeah, no, I got some questions. You were speaking my language there, Brad. You had a trigger word, data. Which is my bread and butter. So when you say data and having all this information, how is this getting utilized on the back end? Like, how does this, is it overwhelming for people to have this much information, yet they still seem to not be able to know how to use it? Are you able to tackle that?
100%. That is one of the biggest challenges I see every day. And I saw myself when I was on the fleet side, managing fleets and managing maintenance. We had a ton of data. The integrity of that and reliance on it is one thing. But what we're doing with Love's Fleet View right now, we've got a lot of AI tools that are built in, and we're building more every day. But one of those is looking at an AI assistant across the board. So we have that available to be able to query that data without having to try to aggregate things from different sources, right? We're bringing in telematics and sensor data. We're bringing that in with the repair and maintenance data to be able to pair those together to really drive a meaningful impact. That's one of the things that I really focus on when I look at AI tools that are out there and talk to fleets. There are a lot of tools out there, and a lot of those are very valuable. But there are also a lot that aren't necessarily where they need to be today. And the way that I would encourage fleets to look at those and vet those is, does it really drive a meaningful impact? Is there something that you can take away from it that's measurable and is going to change your operation? And that's what we're working on. The AI assistants that we have built in really help you synthesize and give you the information that you need without having to go dig through 5, 10, 15 reports and try to put those things together at the end of the day.
Now, Brad, technology, of course, we're in the golden age of it. It's no secret, right? Obviously, I mean, it's everywhere at our fingertips. Is there any technology that you can really kind of point to? Of course, AI being the main course here, but is there anything else that you can really point to that helps maintenance teams kind of get ahead of these problems we've been talking about today?
Yeah, getting ahead of it, that's always been a challenge. I think we've talked about, proactive and now predictive maintenance for a long time. And it's always been a struggle. I still see it out there today. A lot of folks are reactive in what they do for various reasons, right? Again, there's a lot of data there, but being able to make sense of that data and aggregate it to something that's going to really drive some meaningful results is tough. But you look across the industry right now, and I don't think it's been widely adopted yet, but we're starting to see more folks really adopt predictive maintenance to be much more proactive. Dynamic PM intervals instead of looking at just a set schedule, all those things that really look ahead instead of looking back. That's been something that historically, that's all we had to go on was historic data and to try to make decisions from that. But today we're moving to a point where predictive maintenance is real. It's there and it's driving meaningful results. We're seeing that across the industry right now. I think one point of friction there that a lot of folks have had over the last few years with adopting it is it's another portal. It's another place we have to go to get that information, to get those notifications that can be overwhelming. So we bake that into our platform where we have that available. It's part of the repair order process as a technician or an outside vendor is working on something that's visible on there. You get preventative maintenance notifications on that to really drive that point to be proactive and not wait until something breaks on the side of the road. And then obviously with the cost increases in parts and labor, that's even more over the road, right, when you have something on the side of the road. So it's really driving some meaningful impacts, and we're seeing some great results from our fleets right now.
So one of you say predictive instead of preventative. I know back in the day I used to actually deal with this quite a bit. Can you elaborate on the difference between predictive and preventative? I understand there's a little bit of a dynamic there in terms of, preventative maintenance kind of generalized, and I would assume predictive maintenance is a little bit more targeted. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. That is exactly right. So you look at preventative maintenance. It's been what most folks would call a BPM, right? It's an oil change. It's an inspection. We're looking at certain things, and those adapt over time as we, again, historically see failures, we'll add things to those. But we're trying to prevent those failures. And historically, we really haven't known what to prevent until we'd already had those failures, right? And then trying to look back on that data and tie that in. The predictive piece of that is totally, not totally different, but it's a real shift to looking at all of the data around that vehicle. So you're looking at repair history, you're looking at the sensory and telemetry data. All those things pull together to look and say, and it's, a lot of folks, I think, get scared when they hear predictive. They don't understand how it works. And I think we've had across the industry and really just across the world, more understanding of how AI works the last year. But really, at the end of the day, it's just pattern matching, right? You could take this down to a very simple level. Got kind of a funny story on that. I was trying to explain how this all works to my wife the other day. We have two dogs at home, right? And in the evenings, we get ready. I get home, we start to cook dinner and get ready. Well, they get excited, they get anxious, they start wagging their tails. They know what's coming. They're going to get dinner as well, right? And that's at a very basic level how predictive maintenance is working. You look at the historic data. Look at all of the sensory and telematic data telemetry data that's out there, pull those things together just to predict an outcome. And based on all that data, we can predict with a certain level of confidence this is going to happen. So let's get ahead of it instead of waiting until it breaks down on the side of the road or until we get to a PM to fix it.
I want to stay on the theme of technology, Brad, because Fleet View is something I'd like for you to really kind of break down for all of us, for one, and then two, how is this currently helping customers cut cost?
Yeah, so Love's Fleet View is a maintenance software. Obviously, it's very modern, web-based. We do have a mobile app as well, browser agnostic, very easy to use. That's one of the things that we focused on with the platform is the end user side of it. Historically, maintenance softwares have been clunky. I've used them myself. I've been there. They're tough to use. They're tough to get data out of. And I think there's been a real shift in that from, I mentioned it earlier, maintenance softwares have been a system of record over the years. That's what most folks refer to them as, and some still do today. I think at this point, we've moved the last few years into a system of information where you can, it's not just a filing cabinet anymore. We can get reports out of systems. We can see those things, but we're really shifting, I think, into a system of intelligence. And there's a lot of good technology that's going to be coming out and has came out over the last couple of years to really help fleets get visibility to their data, get visibility to things ahead of time. And that's what we're working on with Fleet View. You can get automated warranty notifications that are going to be running through AI. There's various pieces and parts. Essentially, what we're doing right now, we have AI agents running throughout the platform, and those are going to continue to increase over the next couple of years as we build that out further to really help automate as many processes as possible. We've got invoice importing now, where a fleet historically takes a repair invoice. They have to take that, manually put that information in, and a lot of folks don't. They'll just generalize labor and parts to a category, so you lose a lot of visibility there. We're able to import those with all of that data broken down by VMRS code to exactly what it is. And then we have an AI audit process on top of that. This is really driving meaningful savings for fleets. So as that invoice is imported, it looks at the repair history on that unit to look for any rework situations, warranty conditions. It's looking at average national data, fleet data, all of those things to point out anomalies where you may have been overcharged for something. They may have installed a part that they didn't need to. Looking at, again, the warranty conditions, the rework conditions, we've seen a huge impact with fleets and a lot of adoption to the platform due to that audit process. It's something that historically a human has had to do, right? And there's always some things that can happen with that as folks are tied up with a lot of work, processing a lot of invoices. So the audit process that we built in is really helping drive some results for fleets to save a lot of money over the road. And then all of that ties back into the predictive piece, right? Because we have better data with better structure, we know what everything is, we can predict much, much more accurately off of that.
So, I mean, this makes total sense to me. Like, you're able to do this targeted maintenance cycle instead of this overgeneralized one where you're replacing some plugs that don't need to be replaced.
100%.
You're doing some belts, all this kind of stuff. Also saving time, downtime, which is obviously extremely critical to a lot of these fleets. How have you done any, and I like the auditing component too, because that's a nice feedback mechanism that you're giving the customer. Have you been able to quantify some, and I know we're kind of in this period where everyone's catching up on their maintenance spend after 3 years of trying to save money. So I don't want to be like captive by the current environment, but have you been able to quantify some pretty significant savings in some of your customers over the last bit from using some of this more targeted approach, which is honestly my favorite way to do anything. I hate hitting things with blunt instruments don't seem to make a lot of sense to me.
Correct, and we have, yes. It's tough. There's a lot of noise in that, obviously, with all the deferred maintenance that's been happening. Costs are still up across the board, but some fleets that we've tested with specifically and looked at these things, we're seeing cost reductions in those areas where that's being utilized by 15-20% in some cases. Just depends on the fleet and what they run, but the real quantifiable result that we've been able to really target so far is the efficiency and time savings with. Again, you look at the invoice imports that we can do, and that's true for repair invoices as well as parts invoices. There's a lot of manual time in that, right? Or not, if folks aren't putting the full breadth of the data in there and just generalizing. And we've seen up to 60% savings in time. So the efficiency gains are massive with being able to import that data. And then again, you turn around on the back end of that, and the more important piece to me, especially as we move forward with the future, is looking at the quality of that data. And when you have a machine that's much more consistent, tracking those things, putting those things in, pulling those things out, it's much more consistent. You get much better data at the end of the day. That's something we haven't obviously been able to put a number on yet. Still pretty early on, but as we continue to move forward, I think we're going to get some good quantifiable results out there that we'll be able to share with those.
Brad, talk a little bit about, of course, fleets when it comes to rising cost. I mean, is there something that you can point to, whether it's cost or labor or different things that I guess are changing strategies when it comes to fleets?
Yeah, I think it's all the things we've been talking about, right? You look at the tariffs, the increases on parts, which has also driven the higher cost of new equipment. So really, I think since post-COVID, a lot of fleets have extended trade cycles, deferred maintenance, all of those parts and pieces. And I think we're seeing the results of that now. I think that's part of what's driving the overall cost increases, in addition to the tariffs and the parts pricing increases, the technician shortage and the technician wage increases because of that, and all of that drives more downtime. So extended trade cycles has been a big point of emphasis that I've seen over the last couple of years, that now folks are trying to weigh the balance, right? Do we continue to run this old equipment with the higher costs? Do we do the CapEx outlay to replace? What do we do with that? And at the end of the day, you have to have the data that you need to be able to make those decisions. And that's what we're trying to work on. It's what everybody's trying to work on right now, is being able to have that data available to folks when they need it, how they need it, and accessible in a way that they can digest it and use it.
So, Brad, to sum this all up into one nice big package for everyone, what would be the one takeaway that you want everybody to hear at the end? When back in the day when I was being trained on how to, make my conversations more concise, they said, give the one takeaway at the very end that you want everybody to remember what you said by. Give us that one big takeaway.
The one big takeaway that I would have is, first and foremost, don't lose focus of the basics and the principles of fleet maintenance. That's not changing with technology. That's part one. Part two, leverage the technology that's available. Be open to learn about AI, about new technology. Vet it. Make sure that you're asking the right questions, but be open to that technology, because the fleets that are going to win over the next few years, I believe, are the fleets that are going to adopt that technology and really turn their fleet maintenance program from a cost center to a real strategic advantage by having that visibility and be able to make those decisions quickly with the data that they need.
Brad Bournes, again, manager of fleet maintenance and service at Love's Travel Stops and Country Stores. Brad, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to having you back on the show, either this one or there's this other show called What the Truck, too. They got a pretty cool guy there. You should stop by and see him, man.
Absolutely. I've liked and subscribed a long time ago. Love it. Thank you.
Pleasure was all ours, Brad. Appreciate you. And man, that was great stuff with him, though.
I mean, I love the fact that he emphasized data in terms of the feedback. I mean, what gets watched gets fixed.
Yeah.
Is kind of the term that I always live by. And the fact that they're able to get in front of some of this maintenance activity, that is such a hassle.
It's such a hassle.
I mean, when you have a truck on the road for, we've had trucks driving well beyond their maintenance cycles over the last 3 years. And if you can actually save money and make that a more efficient gap in between those maintenance cycles, huge savings.
Huge savings. It's been a huge start to the show. We got much more FreightWaves today coming up. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
The drivers, dispatchers, mechanics, and crews who keep the world moving deserve tools that work as hard as they do. That's what Samsara builds, technology for safer, more efficient operations, made with the people who do the work. Samsara, built with operators for operators. Learn more at samsara.com.
The world doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference. It's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts, 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head to head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else, the connections that change the trajectory of your business, the relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
Welcome back to FreightWaves today. It's been such an awesome kickoff to the show today. And let's continue with the good energy and good vibes, because coming up, of course, my partner in crime, Zach Strickland. This is a Sonar Live update with Zach. Take it away.
All right, welcome to the big wall for the Sonar update today. Let's dive right into the data. So tender rejection rates have stalled out. We're still hovering right around 13.5%, just above that level. That is still a very tight freight market. Like if you think about 1 year ago where we were hovering right around 5.5% rejection rates. And again, for those of you that aren't familiar with tender rejection rates, anything between 5 and 7% is considered a relatively balanced or stable environment. Anything above 7 to 8% is a fairly tight or challenging environment from a procurement perspective. 13% is above that 10% threshold, which makes it extremely challenging for most shippers to find capacity, which leads me to my next point of why are we seeing this decline so hard, so strong? These tender rejection rates want to tell you when it's moving back towards equilibrium, how tight or unbalanced the market is. And you can see the trend line that formed back in June. We were seeing this market outside of the July 4th seasonality want to tell us that equilibrium was somewhere down here, down low, that 5 to 7% threshold that I mentioned. Well, we dropped quickly out of, about halfway through July. And one of the reasons for that, because we're in a supply side led cycle, demand has really fallen down faster than we expected, especially from a seasonality standpoint. You've heard Craig talk about this, you've heard Julie talk about this, but you see this tender volume index, which is a pure measure of tenders going from shipper to carrier. We're below where we were in April. So the fact that we have this threshold breaking, like April is a fairly slow month. July is also kind of a step back from June's elevated level of shipping, but not this much. So this is what's happening to drive those rejection rates down a little bit faster than the overall trend line would have suggested. And I think that the big reason for this is, of course, modal conversion. Craig talked about this on Monday. I wrote a chart of the week about this, looking at long haul tender volumes here. And the chart, you're looking at it's up 2% year over year, but not nearly as much as the intermodal domestic container volumes are, 8% up year over year. And you see that alligator mouth is opening here on the edge, starting to tell us that there's a divergence. And that was the trigger for me, is that we're seeing almost a mirror image of replacement. Now, this does not mean that intermodal is going to continue to replace truckload volumes and capacity throughout the rest of the year, because it's not entirely fungible with that service. Right now, we're in July, August, seasonal pressures, sense of urgency, back to school is already in. There's not a lot of other reasons outside of some late season inventory replenishments to have a lot of urgency around shipping freight. So I think that, a lot of people transitioning because there is a pretty significant cost savings going on. So looking at short haul tender volumes here, just to bring this into full perspective, short haul volumes have held up. They're up 4% compared to long haul volume, tender volumes 2%. Short haul volume continues to be strong, and this is what gives me confidence that this truckload market is not necessarily seeing an early end or an early beginning to end of this cycle. Like, we still have a fairly stable short haul volume. So these are loads moving less than 100 miles. Very strong, actually, 4% year over year growth. So, and we're not seeing that same alligator mouth type perspective from the short haul tender section. So the fact that we're still holding up on the short haul side, and it's the one that's least fungible or replaceable by the domestic intermodal container freight, is also a big telltale sign. Let's move on to spot rates and talk about the spot market. I should have probably moved to the other side so I don't have to keep twisting here. But looking at spot rates, you've got flatbed in purple, you got refrigerated in pink, and you've got dry van in white. So we're seeing a bit of a spread start to emerge here. Now, flatbed has been going strong. AI data center build out really fueling this market. at this point, keeping those rates elevated, although we have started to see a little bit of an edge lower, but this market is still extremely challenged. Refrigerated starting to separate from dry van. This was such a weird mechanism to me, that refrigerated spot rates were moving almost near in lockstep with dry van. Dry van has taken a step lower. That is, of course, the side also most exposed to intermodal demand, which is also another reason that my theory around modal shift has been causing a lot of this movement. Refrigerated is not fungible with intermodal as much, I should say, as the dry van sector is. So dry van spot rates starting to come down a little bit, still tight, still, elevated. And I think we're in a seasonal lull here in August. To pull this back to a bigger point, we've got refrigerated spot rates. So I just talked about how dry van rates are kind of easing. If I pulled up the dry van map, it would look largely red, a little bit of blue scattered out throughout here. Flatbed, fairly flat, a lot of neutral colors, if you will. Anything in blue on this map is actually increasing. Anything in red is decreasing. So when I talked about the RTI, the refrigerated truckload index before, you saw that flattening. Well, it's because half the country's seeing increases and half the country's seeing declines. And what's interesting to me is anytime I pull up one of these maps and I see a big regional aggregation where it's not just the entire country is in blue or red, this tells me there's something going on. And I saw this in the rejection rates earlier this week, where Midwestern regional rejection rates actually starting to really take off this week. A big spike there, and I'm now starting to see it in spot rates. So anybody operating out there in the refrigerated space, you've got the protein sections down here, you've got the grains up here, very heavily concentrated. It's a little early for us to see this, a harvest style map of spot rates and rejection rates increasing in this sector. So definitely a reason to watch for anybody looking at moving refrigerated freight or anybody looking to source capacity on here. So Malcolm, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Zach. That was a phenomenal sonar update. Man, just to see the maps and the walls and everything put together was absolutely outstanding. We're going to be back. We have another guest on the way. Don't miss out. Stick around, only here on FreightWaves today. Huge thanks to today's OTR sponsor, again, OTR Solutions. They believe the right partners should know your business, understand your goals, and be there when it really matters. It's no accident that OTR boasts 4.7 stars on Google. They know that excellent customer support is at the center of every relationship. With responsive teams, industry knowledge, and a commitment to long-term growth, OTR gives customers more than service. It gives them a partner designed to help their business succeed. Learn more again with OTR.
Doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference. It's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts, 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head to head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else, the connections that change the trajectory of your business, the relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
Welcome back to FreightWaves. Today, of course, Volvo Trucks is rolling out unattended over-the-air software updates, letting drivers lock a truck and walk away while it updates overnight or during breaks. This is crazy, all right? More than 80% of connected Volvo trucks now run on the latest software, cutting unplanned stops by 24%. And joining us now to talk all about it is Nicole Portello, the Senior Vice President and Chief Digital Officer at Volvo Trucks North America. Nicole, how's it going? Welcome to FreightWaves today.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to talk a little bit more about what we're doing at Volvo Trucks North America. So thanks a lot for having me on.
Of course, of course. Thank you so much for being here. Now, I just, I get excited. Anytime we talk anything about tech, whether it's, What the Truck, whether it's here on FreightWaves today, I just like to just dive all into it. So you can walk away from this, just give us the entire picture of what exactly is going on here.
I love the enthusiasm. I'm excited too, so it's great that you are. This is something new that we're rolling out. Especially as our trucks become more and more connected. So the entire trucks, our new VNL, our new VNR, these are products we just recently launched. The entire truck is connected. So to do a software update and update the entire truck, it may take a little bit more time. So we wanted to give the drivers a lot of flexibility. If the driver parks the truck overnight, they can kick off the software update, leave the truck, lock the door, they come in the next morning to start their route, and the truck is completely updated with all of the baseline software that needs to be updated. Same thing with the brake. If the driver wants to get out of the truck, he or she no longer has to wait. They can just kick off the update, lock the truck, take a break, do something else, and come back, and it will be ready to go. So we're super excited about the flexibility this gives our fleets. We're super excited about the flexibility that this gives our drivers as well. They're no longer having to wait for those software updates.
So Nicole, give us a bit of a baseline here. How, from where you started, how big of a shift or jump up is this compared to where things were?
Huge jump for us. Before this, we were seeing about 25% of our truck population, and we have over 200,000 connected Volvo trucks in North America, but only about 25% of those trucks were running on the latest software update. So that means 75% of our trucks weren't on the latest software update. And we have this philosophy and this belief that a truck that's updated, that's running on the latest software, those trucks have better uptime, they have less downtime, they have less interruptions. And we've done a side-by-side comparison, and we see those trucks that are running on that latest software update, downtime than the ones that aren't. So we started with that 25% baseline, which is about industry standard. We see that across the industry. And then with all of these updates we've made to make it easier to update the truck, easier for the driver to kick off those updates, we're now at about over 80% of our rolling population is running on the latest software updates. So that means we've pushed out over hundreds of thousands of software updates. If you take that entire and that means over 100,000 days of unplanned downtime that's been avoided, which is about $60 million US. So we're really excited about that. We're excited to keep these trucks moving and on the road because that's how our customers are making money and running their business.
That is, in fact, how customers are making money and running their business. I want to talk about something you just mentioned. It's the perfect segue. I feel like a quarterback right now. You were talking about the drivers. How does this change the game specifically for drivers, given all the innovation and changes that have currently been made? How does this change things for drivers?
Well, I think a lot of this is now the drivers have visibility, which they didn't have before. So the driver can see the information, they can see the update directly on the driver dash. They're no longer waiting for somebody at dispatch or somebody from headquarters to call them and talk them through an update. They can see that directly. The other thing we've launched is what we're calling My Truck app. So we want to have maximum flexibility for the driver. We want them, if it's cold weather or it's hot weather, we want them to be able to go into an app and start the truck, right? Cool it off, heat it up before they have to start their routes. We want them to be able to see their fluid levels, their lights, all of that information in the app as well. So our belief there and our philosophy is that we should put as much information not only in the decision makers' hands, but also with the driver as well, because they're the ones interacting directly with the truck.
So our guest before this actually was talking on a similar vein here about predictive maintenance. So this feels a lot like you guys are able to get in front of some of these maintenance cycles by targeting specific maintenance problems and is that how you're keeping trucks running and the uptime higher than the downtime?
Absolutely. I think this is a perfect segue into that predictive maintenance. So because we're monitoring the truck and now we have a lot more of the truck connected, I mean, we're getting millions of rows of data a minute coming off of these trucks, and we're able to analyze all of that data and start to predict when we might have problems. Because we have all of this machine learning, and we kind of say we were doing AI before AI was a thing, but because we have all this machine learning and AI on that data, we're able to start to look at pattern recognition and say, okay, when we see patterns of fault codes or we see this happening on the truck, there may be a problem. And because of that, we see a 70% reduction in problems. And then when there are problems, when we do see those fault codes that really trigger a problem, those trucks that come in, they have a 30% reduction in the overall repair time because we're able to kind of pre-diagnose those problems. When that truck comes into the dealership, we're pretty sure that this is the problem and this is the fix. And that also results in about a 95% fixed right the first time because we're able to do a lot of that work up front versus at the dealership.
Now, Nicole, why is connectivity now foundational rather than just a standalone feature currently?
I think this has been the shift, especially with the new VNL and the VNR products that we have. I think before it was kind of like we had the truck and we added connectivity to it. Now when we've redesigned these trucks and we have the all-new VNL and the VNR, we built them around connectivity. We know that our fleets are running on very tight schedule, tight margins, so we want to do anything we can to increase the uptime. We hear all the time from our customers as well about safety, like how can we make sure our drivers are coming home at night? How can we make sure our drivers are safe? So a lot of the connectivity we've built is also around safety to make sure that we have that embedded into our trucks. So the entire truck has been redesigned with connectivity in mind so we can continue to make sure these trucks are running, they have maximum uptime, we're keeping the drivers safe, we're keeping those on the road safe as well. So I think it's been a fundamental shift.
I mean, I read through the article that you guys posted online too, and the amount of updates feels astonishing. So how many updates can an average truck get on a single day?
One truck on a weekly average, we can push out over 10,000 updates of software to trucks to the entire population. So yeah, we're able to do it at a maximum scale, and we see a very high take rate of that software. Like I said, 80% of our trucks are running on the latest software. And when we talk to fleets, very few opt out of the automatic because they're like, yes, if you guys can maintain this for us, that's great. That's one less thing we have to worry about. If this truck has the latest software, if this one needs an update or that one needs an update, the more you guys can do to push this out and take the guesswork away from us, it makes it easier.
So when it comes to updates, there's so many different things happening, but how many updates is Volvo Trucks currently pushing out on a given day?
Most of our updates, I mean, we're not just updating for the sake of updating it, right? We want to update it because there's new functionality. I'm not just here like clicking buttons to update trucks, but we want to make sure that if there is some sort of issue with the truck, we can fix it proactively. We want to make sure if there's new features or functionalities, we're able to do that. So most of the time, we're not pushing out thousands of updates a day. It's more, when we see those issues and those targeted truck populations that need to be updated. But we do have the capability to push out tens of thousands if we wanted to.
So Nicole, how many, you guys obviously get a lot of data, I would assume, and are you able to quantify the amount of benefit, like either in cost or time? I think our last guest talked about time. I think to me, I was a former financial analyst, so like time is one of those soft costs that is very challenging to quantify. Have you been able to quantify this in either a cost function or, even the time management?
Yeah, I think with our software updates, if we look at on average, if those trucks were to go into a dealership and get, plug in, get a software update versus over the air, we see about 100,000 days worth of downtime saved on those trucks. And that's, traveling to the dealership, sitting at the dealership, waiting for a software update, traveling back to your depot from the dealership. Because we can do it over the air and we can do it quite quickly over the air, we see over 100,000 days of saved unplanned downtime, and that's about $60 million worth of savings. So I think that's definitely one way to quantify that. The other thing we do with a lot of our data, too, is we're using it in our preventative maintenance. So instead of sticking to a very static schedule for preventative maintenance, now we know how the truck is driving. We know where it is, the miles, the conditions it's driving in. And one thing we're able to do then is to slightly adjust those maintenance schedules for the trucks that are on a service contract with our dealers. So if a truck was maybe spec'd for one application and it's running now a different application, we might need to move the maintenance up or down. And people think about the cost of under-maintaining a truck. That's a significant cost because that can further increase problems down the road. But there's also a cost of over-maintaining the truck. So we're able to see cost savings then if we can push out an oil drain or if we can push out an oil change or a filter update. There's cost savings there, and we use the data to help us quantify that as well.
I love that.
That's insanity. That is insanity.
I wish I had that on my car.
No, for sure. I think we would be successful. Nicole, how is this going to translate, right, realistically into real uptime gains for different fleets?
I think the realistic thing is they'll see less time at a dealership, right? And we hear that from customers, right? That's a realistic time game. That's a realistic savings. I think for the preventative maintenance, we're seeing that already. Like fleets are like, oh, I just was sort of following the schedule that somebody told me years ago to follow. Now you're able to tell me what I need. We're able to pre-plan that too, right? So a truck isn't waiting for something to happen. We're able to call from a dealership and say, hey, you need to come in. Let's start thinking about the next couple of weeks. What does that look like? How can we plan that around your routes? Did you pick up a new job? Should we do this before or after that job ends? So I think that's really the savings for the fleets, right? They see that time savings, that increases their run rate, that increases their uptime, and they're able to do more work.
So having spoken with numerous drivers in my life, have you had any pushback or any reason for people to be skeptical of what you're doing here? Like, because I know personally that I've talked to several and we're like, I don't need to do that right now. And then they just move on. Are you getting any pushback on that?
Not as much as you might think. I think with any change, right? It's change.
Right.
And people are like, are you sure I can push out this maintenance? Are you sure about this? So we do get some of that, but when we back it up with it and we can show them, no, this is what we see. This is the information we have. This is how it compares to overall truck population data. Much more willingness to buy in. And I think, what we hear from our customers too is a lot of times they trust the OEM data. Like if they're saying, okay, Volvo is telling me this, I believe it a little bit more than maybe if it comes from somewhere else. So we do have a little bit of that trust factor in there as well.
So let's talk what's next. I mean, as vehicles keep improving after they leave the factory, what's going to be next?
Well, I think one of the things you just talked about was, the predictive maintenance piece. I think that's something super exciting, right? We're starting to build that with our preventative maintenance, but how do we get a little bit more into the predictive piece of things? How do we start predicting when things may fail or not? So that's something definitely we're looking at, and then looking at like this combination of data. Like I mentioned, the new trucks are more connectivity than our previous trucks. These are the most connected Volvo trucks we've had. So we're digging into that data, looking at possibilities, how do we take those customer pain points, the things that you hear all the time from drivers, from fleet operators, from fleet decision makers, and how do we take that information and do something with it that can help some of those pain points. So lots of opportunity for sure.
So I would assume that since you're getting all this data on a daily, you're actually getting a pretty good feedback on your own equipment, correct? That you're able to then implement for future generations is what you were alluding to, right?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, some of the data, of course, this helps our R&D. This helps us identify, where there's potential quality issues that may need to be addressed.
You're going to build the next super truck with this data?
Yes.
No comments on that.
As we look for the rest of 2026, as we head into 2027, what's top of mind for you and the rest of the team at Volvo that we should definitely be having attention on as well?
I think safety, right? We hear safety, safety, safety from our customers. So anything we can do to improve the safety on our trucks, the safety of the data that we're getting, that's top of mind. Safety's always been a core value of Volvo Trucks, and it will continue to be one of our core focuses in the future. So definitely safety. I can't be the CDO of the company and not mention AI. That's always a big topic. So we're looking at ways we can leverage AI not only with the data that's coming off the truck, but how can we use AI in our entire process, right? And all that we're doing to make things more efficient, more safe for our fleets, as well as using it internally. So definitely a huge focus on AI as well.
Nice. Nicole, when it comes down to it, if you had to just kind of wrap it up, very similar to what we just asked Brad in the first, segment here on FreightWaves today, what should fleets prioritize as trucks become more connected and as the evolution in the space happens right now? What should they prioritize?
What should fleets prioritize? Is that what you said?
Yeah, sorry, fleets. What should they prioritize?
I think they, using the data, right? Making sure that they're taking action on it. Data for, you can drown in data, you can drown in all this connectivity, but it's really making sure that you're working with a partner that can give that actionable insight, right? Data just for data's sake isn't helping anyone, but if you can take that and then take action on it, is there driver behavior or driver coaching? Is that something that needs to be addressed? Is there something in the way we're maintaining the truck that needs to be addressed? So I would say for fleets, make sure you're not just getting data, but you're getting actionable data that you can use to further drive your business.
Of course, Nicole Portello, again, Senior Vice President and Chief Digital Officer at Volvo Trucks North America. Couldn't mess up that title, Nicole. Thank you so much for being on FreightWaves today.
Thank you, guys. It was so great. Thank you.
That's fantastic stuff. We really appreciate you and the team at Volvo for all that you guys are doing, and looking forward to another episode with you in the future.
Definitely. Thanks, guys.
So, Zach, what a show, man, so far. It's been fantastic.
Man, if we had had some of this technology back in the day, I can only imagine, the way that we're, everybody's got a smart truck now.
There's a saying, the game is changing, but the players remain the same.
Yeah.
That's a saying. The game is, in fact, changing quick and in a hurry. Man.
Oh, man. It's incredible. The technology leaps that we've had. AI obviously gets a lot of the headlines, but they haven't even gotten into the full use case for AI.
No.
And they're able to do some of this stuff that feels sort of like common sense to me. It's like we should have been doing this. You can go out and get a smart fridge.
Easily.
Why can't you get a smart truck?
You know where we should have a smart fridge at?
Where?
For concessions at F3, October 27th and the 28th. You guys like how I did that? Make sure you guys are there. If you are not, I don't know why you are not. There's actually a promo code right now that you guys can use. It is TAKE20. You get 20% off of admission into F3 the 27th and the 28th at the Signal here in downtown Chattanooga, Tennessee. It is going to be a fantastic time. You do not want to miss out on it. Again, use the promo code TAKE20 for 20% off of pricing. That's TAKE20. Register now. Stay tuned because we have more FreightWaves today coming up. Freightonomics is up next, only here on FreightWaves Today. I'm Malcolm Harris, joined again by Zach Strickland. This segment is brought to you by Descartes. The best supply chains aren't just faster, they're more connected. That's why leading companies rely on Descartes' global logistics network to connect, collaborate, and move freight with greater visibility and confidence. Powered by innovation and AI, Descartes helps businesses deliver smarter, uniting the people and technology that move the world. Learn more at Descartes.com.
The world doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference, it's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts, 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head to head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else, the connections that change the trajectory of your business, the relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
And welcome back to the Freightonomics portion of FreightWaves Today. Zach Strickland, Director of Freight Market Intelligence. I'm joined by DJ Donahue, our new economist here at FreightWaves/Sonar, however you view us. So on today's show, we're really going to talk about, we're going to do some deep dives into the ocean. Trade policy, geopolitical struggles and uncertainty have really continued, I think, further than a lot of people expected it to. We're seeing spot rates for ocean increase. We're seeing port volumes remain fairly steady, import volumes. The truckload market starting to take a little bit of a step back, but as you'll learn, for those of you that are viewing into this hour or this show independently, that there is a little bit of an explanation for that, and it's no reason for concern on a lot of people who operate in the space thinking, oh, maybe the freight cycle is ending early. No, that's not the case, but We've got some data that supports that as usual, DJ. We also had a lot of economic news this week that we were going to dive into. The inflation figures. This is where I sort of want to start the show today, is with the economic news. We had CPI, PPI readings. These are headline figures. And for those of you that don't know why inflation is such an important figure for anybody in transportation, is because it influences goods demand. As inflation gets higher, affordability can sometimes be impacted by that. Not always. This particular inflation remains sticky. A lot of it is explainable by some of the geopolitical stuff, as well as some of the trade policy stuff that has been going on for the last year and a half. But I think right now, DJ, and I want to get your read on this, is that are we seeing most of this inflation stickiness? Is it truly a big component of this energy, the oil, the Strait of Hormuz closing, or is there there's always nuance to it, but I'd like to get your take here.
There is. My read on it is that when it comes to the energy markets, and inflation overall, we're seeing kind of the stickiness. I think that's going to be the situation going forward. Mm-hmm. The reason being, when it comes to inflation, now let's back up a step and make sure we're talking about the right things. You've got energy prices, and then you've got inflation more broadly. Mm-hmm. When we talk about inflation, we're talking about a rise in the general level of all prices, not just the single market of oil. Although lots of people buy oil, it tends to be very inelastic. It doesn't respond a whole lot to price changes, how much you use. Right. But when we're talking about inflation, we are talking about two things that really drive it: the amount of stuff you have and the amount of money in the economy. And when you think about this, and this is again going back to kind of old school Econ 101, mm-hmm. we have to think about how much money is in the economy and how much stuff we have, because any price you're talking about, any price you have, mm-hmm. it is a ratio. It's the amount of money you have to give to the amount of stuff you get, right? Now, most people think about this in real basic terms. Right. You go to the grocery store, you buy a loaf of bread, you've got $2.50 for a loaf of bread for the inexpensive stuff. So that's $2.50 for one loaf of bread. Now, when we're talking about inflation, we're talking about all the prices rising. So we have to think about it in a much larger scale. So instead of just one good, like the loaf of bread in the bottom side of the ratio, we're talking about all goods. Mm-hmm. Best proxy, or maybe not best, but most frequently used proxy is GDP. Right. The amount of all final goods and services we've produced in the American economy. Final is important, but we're not going to go that deep today. On the top of the ratio, you've got the amount of money you give for your stuff. Now, when we talk about that, we're talking specifically about how much kind of loose cash you have. Mm-hmm. That equates to what we call, measured by the Federal Reserve, the M1 money supply. Mm-hmm. That's demand deposits like your checking accounts. Right. It's also kind of your loose cash that you have easy access to. And so when you think about the total amount of prices in the economy, we can't say all the prices all at once. So we have to put them together into one number. Right. That's where CPI comes in. Right. CPI, the Consumer Price Index, normally all city, all urban, all goods prices is one that gets most frequently cited. So when we think about this, when we think about inflation, inflation is a rise in CPI, the index of prices over time. Mm-hmm. And when we're looking at this, we have to, and what's driving it, you see lots of arguments about what's driving it here and on. From the economic standpoint, the things that are going to be driving it are the amount of stuff you have mm-hmm. and the amount of money in the economy. Mm-hmm. Because when you think about it from that ratio standpoint, money to stuff. Right. If the amount of stuff remains stable and your amount of money goes up that you have to pay for the stuff, then what's going to happen is that if you go to the other side of the equal sign, your number's going to go up. Right. If the amount of stuff goes down and your amount of money stays stable, that also means you're going to see your price go up. We saw that during COVID, right. where production, we had a supply shock. We had mm-hmm. Production contract, mm-hmm. and so what happened? Prices went up, even though the amount of money we had relatively stable at the time. Now, I say that during COVID, that was before the CARES Act. Right. During the CARES Act of 2021, I believe it was, mm-hmm. That was passed during COVID, and we saw it was practically a quadrupling of the right. M1 money supply during that time, because they sent out a bunch of checks to people, mm-hmm. and the way they got those checks was not through taxation. They cranked the printing presses at the Federal Reserve right. and U.S. Treasury. Figuratively, they just added a bunch of zeros to accounts. But what happened during that time is we saw a bunch more money enter the economy mm-hmm. relative to a stable amount of stuff. Right. Or even a smaller amount of stuff because of supply shock. Right. And so smaller amount of stuff.
We had both.
Yeah,
we
had
really
both
had
at the same
both.
time.
I mean, it's hard. You know, I've talked about this numerous times. It's hard to talk about supply and demand independent of each other. Like whenever you say that it's all supply or all demand, or like that's never the case. It's always both. It's just one tends to have a little bit stronger influence over the other in some situations. In transportation markets, it's typically demand that shows up in a very volatile way. But right now, it's actually been more about supply. But back to your point on the larger economy. Like let's parse this down and see what.
So what we've had over time, we had that giant shock of additional money flooding into the supply. There was a little bit of manipulation with the Inflation Reduction Act under Biden, but generally that amount of money has stayed high.
Right.
And so when we still have a very large amount of money relative to the amount of stuff, which means high prices, which means we're probably going to see this amount of inflation stick around for quite a while unless there is a significant reduction in the money supply. Probably not going to happen because that's going to create a price shock and will have impact on credit markets. And the Fed actually has a dual mandate. A lot of people don't realize this. Not only do they have control over monetary policy, but they have from Congress 2 mandates. One is to keep as close to full employment as possible, and the other is to keep prices stable.
Right.
So if they drop, and so it's like that's where the tightrope walk comes in. If they drop the money supply in order to put the brakes on inflation, it's going to have a flip side effect of increasing interest rates, and it's also going to cause credit to get harder credit harder to obtain.
Right.
And credit is the lifeblood of business.
Sure. So but in the context of our current environment, obviously the Strait of Hormuz being closed, we saw CPI shoot up directly after this. So there's obviously a huge component of oil and gas prices, and we can parse that apart for days if we wanted to, and I don't want to do that. But I do want to talk about it from a high-level perspective in the sense of if you talk, the Federal Reserve meeting coming up in September is arguably one of the hardest meetings that this group is going to have.
Yeah.
Warsh, of course, is under a lot of pressure, a lot of criticism. I don't know if he actually feels it that way or not, but he came into this job, I think, knowing he was going to get a lot of heavy attention on him. But that being said, I think that you can make a case, from my perspective, from my chair, you can make a case that increasing interest rates is actually somewhat counterproductive in this situation because you have such this large outsized influence on this CPI figure that's coming from something that's outside of the scope of a simple interest rate increase. Because the Strait of Hormuz, of course, oil prices, we're fairly... we've got lower inventories than we've had in years in the United States, but, the WTI is still not that expensive relative to where it probably could be. So I guess my question to you is because we produce a bunch of stuff outside of the country, outside of our walls. We ship a lot of our oil away to get refined and bring it back. So it's not like we can just disconnect from the environment overnight.
Indeed.
So this global pressure that we're getting is manifesting in an inflationary way internally because that increases our goods, food to an extent, and that 2.5% core reading is the one that feels sticky to me. 3.4 includes energy
and food.
And when we also talk about transportation's increasing, costs are increasing independent of that oil and energy component as well. So there is some other components of inflation. Should you, in your mind, should we actually still, I think the argument to kind of hold out is still there in my mind. Do you agree with that? Because of some of these things that are really independent of Fed pressure?
So let me make sure I understand your question correctly. You want to know if, and I want to make sure I get it right. So you want to know if the inflation is going to remain sticky despite the...
If the Strait of Hormuz closed or opened back up tomorrow, oil prices started settling out, would you then be concerned about inflation?
Yes.
Okay.
I still would be concerned about inflation because While the Strait of Hormuz does impact prices, it's only one component, and we're seeing because it's inflation. This is why the discussion between inflation and single price increases are so important. Because when you talk about inflation, you're talking about a broad spectrum of prices. So it's not just oil going up, it's not just food going up. Even though those are important things, you've got other things that are going up as well. Even if the Strait of Hormuz were to open up, and not just Hormuz, but Bab el-Mandab on the other side of Oman and Yemen, if they were to open up tomorrow and everything would be, okay, we've got peace, we're good, I would still worry about inflation because the core metrics are parts of domestic production, domestic money supply, and that is what we're really having to worry about there. So I would still worry about inflation. I think this high 3-4% inflation is probably what we're going to be seeing as steady for the next few years, because we're still recovering. You know, we had an attempt to shut down the economy, not just ours, but the entire world's economy back during COVID. And that is not something one just, kind of picks up and dusts off and goes on like nothing happened. There are sectors of the economy that still haven't caught up and may never. Yeah. So I think that inflation is still going to be a concern because, again, the two main drivers are money supply and amount of stuff. Now, GDP does include the net exports when you're looking at them, because if we're making something here and selling it elsewhere, that's that's an export. We count that towards ours. But if it's an import from somebody else, we buy and elsewhere, it's made elsewhere, and we buy it here, that counts against GDP. So that is included. But we still are looking at the amount of stuff and the amount of money. Those are your two core metrics when it comes to looking at inflation. And we still have high money supply. We still have it running very high relative to the CARES Act. And I think Warsh is in a real tough position, maybe tougher than he realizes, because what's going to happen is that he's going to have a very hard decision to make. He's got that dual mandate from Congress, and you've got two diametrically opposed forces here. You've got the desire to keep rates stable, which is going to depend on keeping your money supply under control and keeping your prices, it's the inflation question. On the other side, you've got the jobs question. You've got the full employment question, which depends on credit and businesses' ability to get credit. If you reduce money supply, rates go up because the interest rate is the price of loanable funds.
Because you're destroying demand simultaneously in theory, but that takes a while, does it not?
Actually, changes in demand can happen very quickly. It's the changes in supply that take time because supply tends to be less elastic. Supply, because of things running through business processes, because of hiring lags, because of businesses' lack of desire. They don't really
It's hard to ramp production.
It's hard to ramp production. You got to build new factories. You got to do new stuff. And so supply tends to be slower to respond to price changes than demand does. Whereas demand, we see it happen on a regular basis. My favorite example of this was the lean, finely textured beef. Now, you've probably never heard that phrase before. Do you know what lean, finely textured beef is? This came up some years ago, and it was referred to in the media as pink slime.
Yes, I know what this is.
Now you remember the story. What happened was a story came out that certain fast food restaurants were utilizing what they called pink slime, which was disinfected small pieces of meat as part of their hamburgers they were selling. And it turns out this had been the practice for years and years, and it was not necessarily unsafe. I remember talking to a member of, I think it was the Cattlemen's Board in one of the Midwest states where cattle was really big. And we said the phrase pink slime. He looks at me and says, lean, finely textured beef. I'm like, okay. So that kind of demand can turn on a dime. It's supply that takes time to change and ramp up and see changes, even though the changes in supply tend to be a lot bigger because that's when you're talking about factories shutting down or factories opening up or the movement of production across into different states, different areas. You also have supply lags when it comes into much larger products. Think about things like agriculture, very seasonal in nature. The decisions that are going to be made to affect output are made in spring when you're not harvesting until fall. So you've got a huge lag in production there that even if the price of corn goes to, $15 a bushel, you can't plant all that much when you're in midsummer. So there are certain natural processes that have a way of stopping or not necessarily being able to respond. That's why we call it less elastic. It doesn't bounce as much when you hit it with a shock.
Yeah, so we also had the PPI this week that came out, and I want to get your take on that. But the PPI, of course, is the upstream, the wholesale, before it gets passed along to the consumer. A lot of the components of trucks, for instance, cost of production, their stuff. Sometimes the retailers can't pass those along via the CPI. The end user, the final demand there. The PPI is, of course, the upstream component. How did that look to you, and are there any signs there that that this inflation figure is going to remain sticky or go down?
So when it comes to the PPI, again, let's take a moment and talk about the split between them. So CPI is Consumer Price Index, all city urban is rule, PPI the production side. And there were a few things, particularly when it comes to the transportation industry, that were worth calling out. When it came to the CPI gasoline and in PPI gasoline, we're seeing a little bit of drop month over month in the July numbers. So the CPI gasoline was down 2.9%. PPI gasoline, which is what the producers are seeing, are actually down 5.7%.
Which is typical. You get retail lags the back end by a good bit, and of course the magnitude sometimes does not translate purely either.
It's not just that, but we're also coming on the back of peak driving season. July holidays are ending, and so we normally see a peak in prices in July.
Right.
But the big thing is that when you look at the year-over-year numbers, that's where the big story is, because we are still seeing on the PPI side 37% year-over-year, CPI is 24.6% year-over-year. So while we still have a
higher level,
we still have a little bit of down. It's a decrease in the rate of increase. Which is weird to say, but it's still going up, but the rate at which it increases is going down. So we still have a very large year-over-year in place we're coming from.
Right.
So while it's not hurting quite as bad, you get a little bit month-over-month relief, it's still nothing to write home about.
Yeah, so we're still going to recover, and it's going to take a minute to recover from that. So we are going to toss to a quick break, and when we return, you'll get a little bit of a market update.
If you haven't evaluated Motor City Systems software applications and integrations, it's time to take a look. Motor City's team brings deep industry knowledge to help improve carrier operations with its software and integrations, including Roller, customizable driver app and workflow, Relay, advanced messaging and communication, Torque, integration platform, Wire, modern EDI, TUTS. Visit motorcity.systems to learn more.
Doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference. It's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business: the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts. 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head-to-head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else. The connections that change the trajectory of your business. The relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
All right, welcome to the big wall for the Sonar update today. Let's dive right into the data. So tender rejection rates have stalled out. We're still hovering right around 13.5%, just above that level. That is still a very tight freight market. Like if you think about 1 year ago where we were hovering right around 5.5% rejection rates. And again, for those of you that aren't familiar with tender rejection rates, anything between 5 and 7% is considered a relatively balanced or stable environment. Anything above 7 to 8% is a fairly tight or challenging environment from a procurement perspective. 13% is above that 10% threshold, which makes it extremely challenging for most shippers to find capacity, which leads me to my next point of why are we seeing this decline so hard, so strong? These tender rejection rates want to tell you when it's moving back towards equilibrium, how tight or unbalanced the market is. And you can see the trend line that formed back in June. We were seeing this market outside of the July 4th seasonality want to tell us that equilibrium was somewhere down here, down low, that 5 to 7% threshold that I mentioned. Well, we dropped quickly out of, about halfway through July. And one of the reasons for that, because we're in a supply side led cycle, demand has really fallen down faster than we expected, especially from a seasonality standpoint. You've heard Craig talk about this, you've heard Julie talk about this, but you see this tender volume index, which is a pure measure of tenders going from shipper to carrier. We're below where we were in April. So the fact that we have this threshold breaking, like April is a fairly slow month. July is also kind of a step back from June's elevated level of shipping, but not this much. So this is what's happening to drive those rejection rates down a little bit faster than the overall trend line would have suggested. And I think that the big reason for this is, of course, modal conversion. Craig talked about this on Monday. I wrote a chart of the week about this, looking at long haul tender volumes here. And the chart, you're looking at it's up 2% year over year, but not nearly as much as the intermodal domestic container volumes are, 8% up year over year. And you see that alligator mouth is opening here on the edge, starting to tell us that there's a divergence. And that was the trigger for me, is that we're seeing almost a mirror image of replacement. Now, this does not mean that intermodal is going to continue to replace truckload volumes and capacity throughout the rest of the year, because it's not entirely fungible with that service. Right now, we're in July, August, seasonal pressures, sense of urgency, back to school is already in. There's not a lot of other reasons outside of some late season inventory replenishments to have a lot of urgency around shipping freight. So I think that, a lot of people transitioning because there is a pretty significant cost savings going on. So looking at short haul tender volumes here, just to bring this into full perspective, short haul volumes have held up. They're up 4% compared to long haul volume, tender volumes 2%. Short haul volume continues to be strong, and this is what gives me confidence that this truckload market is not necessarily seeing an early end or an early beginning to end of this cycle. Like, we still have a fairly stable short haul volume. So these are loads moving less than 100 miles. Very strong, actually, 4% year over year growth. So, and we're not seeing that same alligator mouth type perspective from the short haul tenders section. So the fact that we're still holding up on the short haul side, and it's the one that's least fungible or replaceable by the domestic intermodal container freight, is also a big telltale sign. Let's move on to spot rates and talk about the spot market. I should have probably moved to the other side so I don't have to keep twisting here. But looking at spot rates, you've got flatbed in purple, you've got refrigerated in pink, and you've got dry van in white. So we're seeing a bit of a spread start to emerge here. Now, flatbed has been going strong. AI data center build out really fueling this market at this point, keeping those rates elevated, although we have started to see a little bit of an edge lower, but this market is still extremely challenged. Refrigerated starting to separate from dry van. This was such a weird mechanism to me. That refrigerated spot rates were moving almost near in lockstep with dry van. Dry van has taken a step lower. That is, of course, the side also most exposed to intermodal demand, which is also another reason that my theory around modal shift has been causing a lot of this movement. Refrigerated is not fungible with intermodal as much, I should say, as the dry van sector is. So dry van spot rates starting to come down a little bit. Still tight, still, elevated, and I think we're in a seasonal lull here in August. To pull this back to a bigger point, we've got refrigerated spot rates. So I just talked about how dry van rates are kind of easing. If I pulled up the dry van map, it would look largely red, a little bit of blue scattered out throughout here. Flatbed, fairly flat, a lot of neutral colors, if you will. Anything in blue on this map is actually increasing. Anything in red is decreasing. So when I talked about the RTI, the refrigerated truckload index before, you saw that flattening. Well, it's because half the country's seeing increases and half the country's seeing declines. And what's interesting to me is anytime I pull up one of these maps and I see a big regional aggregation where it's not just the entire country is in blue or red, this tells me there's something going on. And I saw this in the rejection rates earlier this week, where Midwestern regional rejection rates actually starting to really take off this week. A big spike there, and I'm now starting to see it in spot rates. So anybody operating out there in the refrigerated space, you've got the protein sections down here, you've got the grains up here, very heavily concentrated. It's a little early for us to see this, a harvest style map of spot rates and rejection rates increasing in this sector. So definitely a reason to watch for anybody looking at moving refrigerated freight or anybody looking to source capacity on here. And boom, I'm here. So yeah, the refrigerated market is definitely taking off. And it's interesting to me that we have a lot of noise in the market around all the different, Montgomery Carib and how much of an influence is that having. The Midwest is arguably one of the epicenters of this market turn that we've had over the last year and a half. And I think it's been due to some of the immigration stuff and things like that. So whenever I see this out of seasonality movement in the market, I'm paying attention. This feels early for refrigerated to have a Midwestern flip, but here we are. So DJ, we left off talking about inflation. I want to first call out the box office component here, because consumer conditions, top of mind. This chart comes from Apollo. They send out a newsletter every day, and Torsten Slok, of course, very fantastic at this. But the box office numbers over this summer have been insane because primarily of Odyssey and Spider-Man now taken off. So we were talking about money supply and how well the consumer's doing. They seem to be doing just fine in terms of going to the movie at this point, because it feels like the box offices have been a little sluggish since COVID. People aren't going to the movies. This takeoff, this beats every single year. Even going back to before COVID, they're having a renaissance. Do you think this is this just kind of one of those things where we had a nice little pocket of interesting movies, or do you think this is actually a consumer condition takeaway?
I'm hesitant to break this out as strictly one or strictly the other.
Okay.
I think it could be a little bit of both. We did have some big blockbusters this summer. We've got Spider-Man on top of that and Odyssey. We've also got Super Mario Galaxy still making the rounds in places. Yeah. We've got Toy Story 5. Yeah. So we do have some big names out there. And those, with the exception of Odyssey, by and large, those are kids' movies.
Yeah.
And we're coming off of a summer where it's been hotter than the Dickens. Right?
Yeah, it's been warm here.
We don't want, I mean, what's one of the great things to do when the kids are off from school and it's hot as heck outside? You take them to a movie. Yeah. So it's partly, I think, we have had a blockbuster summer. Yes, we're seeing kind of return and the consumers being a little bit healthier. But when we look at this from a credit standpoint, it might be a little bit different. We're looking here at weekly movie theater visits. If you look at this in terms of grosses are up too. But again, I don't have the data to parse that out and say how much is due to increased ticket prices and overall inflation.
Yeah, certainly I don't want you to tie this completely to the economy. It just, to me, it's almost like even if things weren't great, I think people would still go to the box office for those two movies specifically. Mm-hmm. I think there was so much, it was like the Barbenheimer summer where there was so much energy around it that I think, never doubt the American consumer and their ability to spend money, even if they don't have it, which leads me to I think the next point you were trying to make here is that consumer credit came out. And this one is always a concern to me because never doubt the American consumer is going to spend their way into debt either,
That is also true.
And so is there something here that we need to be concerned about?
So, this week we had, we had the Fed, not this week, late last week, we had the Fed's G19 release, and it showed up that consumer credit use was 3.3% annualized in June. Mm-hmm. But the composition of that matters. And so we saw that the revolving credit was up 6.0%, which revolving credit is your credit cards. That's what people are spending their money on. Mm-hmm. We're talking about that is faster than the non-revolving credit, but the tricky part of that is that we're also seeing interest rates on credit cards up high at the same time. Right. We're seeing that as of last May, which is the most recent read we've got on that, they're holding at about 22.15% on credit cards. So they're utilizing more credit, but they're also paying a lot more to use that credit. Yeah. So it's one of those things where they're kind of saying, okay, I've got this credit, I'm going to use it because we've got whatever need in place. And from the last story we were looking at, the kids were at home and we need a place to go cool off and keep them occupied for a while. I mean,
22.15%, like you can't get a return on many investments that's that high. Like that is an insanely high level. If you put it in the context of the S&P, I think gains are up around, they're in the double digits, I think, still year over year, but they're not 22%.
That is also true. And you got to also remember what credit is doing here. Yeah. When we talk about a revolving line of credit, it's not money itself. Right. I want to tie that back to our discussion of inflation. Lines of credit do not count as money. Right. They are a at-will contract where you got that little card. If you swipe it, you're not creating money. You're simply saying, I'm going to borrow somebody else's money and pay them interest on top of it. And so that interest rate, that 22.15 we're seeing, that's how much you're paying whichever bank is loaning you their money on demand. So that's one important point to make. And the trick is that when we look at this from the most recent survey coming out, we also saw from the New York Fed released household debt this week. Yeah. On household debt, they actually report on how much of the percent of accounts are 90 days plus delinquent. Mm-hmm. And looking at that, we're starting to see it was month over month, there was a little bit of drop, but there has been a steady increase in the amount of revolving credit card debt that has been delinquent over 90 days since like the since Q1 of 2023. Right. So while people are out there using it, most recently over the last quarter, we're seeing a little bit of a decrease, but still by and large, we're looking at about between 10 and 15, somewhere around 13% of accounts. They're just being held delinquent. They're using up the credit, but they're not necessarily paying it off.
Is that high? I mean, is that a concern? I mean, because
I would, because that's it's part and parcel why the interest rates are high, because if we're talking about interest rates as a function of risk. Right. If you're going to loan somebody money, and again, a credit card is an on-demand loan system. Right. How much are you going to pay or how much you're going to charge in order to bear that risk yourself that someone's going to turn around and pay it back. Now, the last time we saw numbers pretty much approaching this high was honestly quarter one of 2010, coming off of the Great Recession.
Oh.
Yeah, so the last time they were up around this level, we were coming off the Great Recession. Everybody was utilizing credit cards because we had the McMansion crisis, we had the housing crisis, we had financial problems with the the big firms, the too big to fail problem.
Yep.
So this is actually, it's been increasing since the since 2023, and it's still been going up. We had a downturn this last quarter, but it's still very high relative to historical terms.
Yeah, and does the money supply have an influence on this? Like, are we?
Indirectly.
Yeah.
And so, because when we talk about the money supply, we're talking about inflation, we're talking about the Fed's dual mandate. When it comes to the money supply, we're talking about the amount of loanable funds.
Right.
When money gets printed, normally it goes through big names first. It goes into the banks, it goes into the major industrial sectors, but it doesn't necessarily get passed down to the consumer. That takes time to work through. And because this gets asked to me sometimes, well, we had big quantitative easing, QE1, QE2 back under Bernanke when he was head of the Federal Reserve. Why didn't we see giant inflation then? Because of the stock market. This is one explanation. I don't know 100% if it's true, but it makes sense when you talk about it. Because think about what happened during COVID. We had these issues where people are like, well, the economy's in the tank, we're shut down, but the stock market's still doing gangbusters. Why is that? Mm-hmm. We had a lot of money being pumped and printed and pumped into the economy, which causes, because stock prices are a price, just like everything else. It's a ratio of money to stuff. Mm-hmm. In this case, it's money relative to a piece of a company. Mm-hmm. And so when you've got a lot of money being pumped into the economy and it's sitting in the financial sector and everybody's scared, and so they're kind of holding on to their reserves, it means that your stock valuations are going up higher and higher and higher, which leads to higher stock prices.
Oh man, and that feels like something that is happening on steroids after COVID. Mm-hmm. So DJ, thank you for that right now. So we're gonna toss to a quick break, and when we come back, we're gonna start picking apart some of the stories that we're seeing in the headlines, especially around the maritime space. And then we have spot rates. I mean, I think this ongoing Strait of Hormuz situation continuing to be a big problem for a lot of the maritime providers.
Absolutely. We have other news to talk about as well when we get back.
All right. So, I mean, when we come back from this next break, we'll talk about some of that as well as some of the other influences. We had the NMCSA going on, so a lot of international trade components. So I think we're ready for a break now. Let's go ahead and do it. Oh, you're not ready yet. Okay. Never mind.
Let's talk about it now then.
Let's just go. Let's run with it. Live TV. So first one up, the first one I want to talk about, Borderlands, Mexico, USMCA gives Mexico an edge as global trade barriers rise. This one is a fascinating article. Noy Mahoney, of course, covers Borderlands. Everyone should read this. USMCA, of course, is been kicked. The president has basically said, no, we're not going to do this, even though it just means that we're going to continue to do it until something happens and we renegotiate it. And so what this does, I feel like, is that it creates this additional layer of uncertainty.
Yes.
So we're always going to have this hanging over us. So when you're talking to businesses and they're like, well, how much import volume is going to happen out of Mexico over the next 10 years? Who knows? Because at any point in time, we could go in and renegotiate all these things. So Mexico accounts for 16 to 17% of the imports that come in. But of course, in terms of value, they're the number one import process. And the interesting thing to me that we talked about this on FreightWaves today is that electronics have taken over the top spot in terms of, because Mexico is a very automotive-centric manufacturing supply chain production area in the United States or in North America. And you have this big connective railroad tissue that's coming north and south right there as well. I just, this is such an overhang, and it's one more thing on top of, we just talked about Strait of Hormuz and its influence on inflation. We've had trade policy stuff continue to be unclear. I've talked to numerous people in the space about how they can't really make a commitment to an investment in their capital expenditures because they have all of these things that they can't clearly understand or know anything about. Specifically in this situation, we've got no clear agreement and it's going to last.
And the uncertainty is the big question here, because you've got to do, 3-year plan, 5-year plan. You got to look into the future and say, okay, how are we going to start moving big things in motion in order to get our ducks in a row? As I said before, supply is inelastic. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of stuff and a lot of looking forward in order to move stuff in time. So let's back up and kind of clarify what's going on with USMCA. First off is that,
Craig hates that acronym, by the way.
USMCA?
It's really hard to say.
Well, the USMCA is, we declined the long-term renewal on it as a country. So, or I say we, the administration did. It was enabled to be renewed through 2042. That was declined. Now, from now until its intended expiry date of 2036, there's going to be annual reviews every year. So it could be that if there's a review come in, the administration, whoever's in power at the time, says, nope, we don't like it, it's gone. That can happen. And we have seen that this administration loves utilizing tariffs as a function of, or as a tool for foreign policy. Now, there's all kinds of things coming through when it comes to tariffs, like who actually pays the tariff. There's lots of economics around that. It depends on, and I think we may have talked about this before, the idea of monopsony power. Who has the market power? Is it the buyer or the seller? And so when we talk about monopsony, that's a real funny word. Nobody knows about it.
I was going to ask you what it is.
So everybody knows the term monopoly. That is a situation, it's not just a board game. It is a situation that we as consumers face on a very frequent basis. Is where you have one seller for a product, but lots and lots of buyers. Everybody's familiar with this because it means as a situation, because we all deal with it. Things like utilities. You only have usually one utility for power or gas or whatever, especially cable carriers, like entertainment carriers. You only have one in a given area. And so it doesn't matter what you want to do, you can either buy it or not. Because you can't really go somewhere else. That causes problems, or it causes concerns, I should say, because it means that they have a lot of market power. If they want to up their rates, you as consumer are more or less powerless because you either have the chance to buy or not buy. You can't get your goods from somewhere else. Whereas in a competitive market, when you have lots of buyers, lots of sellers, if as a buyer, the seller is not providing what you want, you go down the street, go somewhere else. If you don't like the way the McDonald's burgers taste, you go next door to Burger King because they're always right next to each other. Monopsony is the same side of the market power coin. You will have one buyer, lots and lots of sellers. The most frequently seen example of this is the rural hospital, or it's been one of the best examples. When you go to work, you are selling your labor to your employer. That's the way to think about it. They give you money, you give them labor, you are selling them your time and effort. When you have a rural hospital example, you've got a lot of nurses, doctors, specialized labor. But you'll normally only have one hospital or major medical facility within a rural area. Think like somewhere in the boot heel of Missouri. I happen to know a former CEO of a hospital in that area. And you don't have a whole lot of ability to sell your labor because there's no one else to buy. And so the market power in that case lies with the buyer. Now, when it comes to tariffs, we are buying international goods. They're coming here. And if we have monopsony, market power, then that means we can push our will, our decision power onto the sellers. However, if there are competitors, if someone else is able to provide or is also willing to buy the same product, our market power diminishes. And there are very few products, in fact, none I'm aware of, in which we hold sole monopsony power. That is, if China's coming to us with electronic components, somebody else will also want to buy it. If Colombia is selling us coffee, I don't know about you, I love coffee. I love good coffee. But there's lots of other places in the world, they also like coffee. And so if we try to tariff and put a tax on Colombian coffee, it doesn't matter if we want to try and increase the price. If Brazil or Colombia says, well, we're just going to take our coffee somewhere else, if you try and make us pay it, what's going to happen is that our domestic consumers end up paying the tariff. And this is a big field of economics known as tariff or tax incidence, because a tariff is a tax. There is, you normally are supposed to go through Congress, but under limited authority that they've delegated to the executive, he can
Yeah, he's basically got the tariffs lined up, ready to go if in the case that these are struck down. And that's kind of the ongoing thing, is that we're just going to have to deal with these tariffs being in place without a definitive end or clarity on what's going to land, if this administration exits. And that's another component that's holding a lot of this investment.
All that to say that with the uncertainty in USMCA and the tariff policy, it's constraining our customers and constraining businesses because they don't have a clear read into the future as to what's going to happen regarding international tax policy.
So speaking of not knowing what's going to happen next, the next article that I want to bring up here is why 47.5 is a scary number for East Coast ports. This one, it's kind of a double-edged sword because we've been talking about it's hurricane season. And normally that can be a boom or bust or a very disruptive force in freight for sure. It's a very quiet hurricane season in the Atlantic, and it's because we have this super El Nino function happening. And El Nino is, of course, just the unseasonable warming of the Pacific Ocean in relation to the Atlantic. And the Atlantic is a little bit more stable, so we're not seeing as much hurricane activity, but that also means we're not seeing as many tropical waves and as much rain. And how that matters here is that Panama, the holder of the Panama Canal, is not getting enough rain. And so when Panama Canal doesn't get enough rain, the lake that traverses that isthmus there, it doesn't get filled enough. So you can't have these big vessels cross the Panama Canal. We've seen this before in the past. Just a few years ago, a lot of these boats, they could not cross the Panama Canal because the drafts were too long or too deep or too shallow, I should say, and they could not cross them. So it really caused a lot of service disruption. Now, if we look at what we're seeing in some of the spot rates already, crossing the East Coast, some of this East Coast centric stuff was already being disrupted by the Suez not being traversable. You've got the Strait of Hormuz causing a lot of capacity concerns and the geopolitical problems over there. So a lot of these carriers their capacity is getting sucked into extended transit times. Vessels aren't as capable of doing this. And so when we're talking about Panama being shut down or limited in terms of its ability to be traversed, that's another potential supply chain problem, another inflationary pressure for the third quarter. And we're not seeing this manifest yet in terms of a true disruption, because I do think we're going to have a couple of systems come across the Atlantic this week. I don't know if it's going to be sufficient. But it is going to be something to watch here in the third, fourth quarter when we start to see these import volumes make their last push. This next article that I think is worth calling out, the Descartes container imports surge on China peak season momentum. This one highlights that, we're having a pretty strong import surge. A lot of it's coming in through the ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, because that's where a lot of that freight comes from. If we pull up the IOTI, which is the chart that measures the bookings of imports, 20-foot containers coming into the United States from all over the world, this has been a fairly plateau-y, not a peak, but a plateau of a season for import volumes. If you look at the white line underneath the spaghetti factory you see on top of it, it's a very stable, what I think we would consider a peak season. Traditional peak season for imports is around this time of year. China peak import season, that's what Descartes' calling out here, and they saw some significant gains. But look at the comps here. Last year, the yellow line, this was a weird year for imports, to put it concisely. We had this erratic trade policy implementation, people avoiding tariffs, people recovering from cost prohibitive tariffs earlier in the year. That yellow peak was really pronounced and early. This year, we're seeing more of it was a little bit early in the sense of traditional volume increases, although 2024, we had the same type of thing. But it's maintaining at a fairly elevated level, and the comps get continuously easier compared to last year because last year we were overheated during the summer. And I think this is, we talked to Dr. Rogers about where inventory levels are. This is the chart that tells me that shippers are holding a fairly consistent ordering process. It's not overheated. It's not too little. They're just ordering, and the name of the last Freightonomics was walking a tightrope. If we have continued disruption. If we have the Panama Canal shut down or limited in terms of its capacity, I think this puts shippers on another like defensive posturing. It's like, what do you do next when you can't get the freight to the store shelves? The consumers are continuing to show up. That's another part of the equation we just spent a bunch of time talking about. We talked about businesses and their capital expenditure potential. If we get increasing interest rates, they're probably going to pull back on their capital expenditures for a period of time until they feel confident that they can spend money. So this is going to be an interesting few months to watch to me, because if we see the IOTI start to, percolate, for lack of a better word, that to me is a sign that shippers are now not prepared or they have been too defensive in their ordering strategies. And I'm thinking, if the stuff isn't on the shelves, you're going to see truckload volumes really spike, because intermodal, which you heard me talk about on the market update, intermodal has been the cost savings mechanism. They got ample time. Intermodal transit across the country is typically like add 1 or 2 days to a truck. And then if we have any disruption on the intermodal side, which we haven't even talked about, that's another layer. Like there's a couple of tiny choke points setting up in supply chains and infrastructures, and some of the things I'm seeing with defensive ordering strategies around the uncertainty. There's not a lot of margin for error in this economy and in the transportation and supply chains for the next few months. Doesn't necessarily mean that this market is going to go haywire. But let's look at the Freightos chart of the spot rates for rates moving. These are 40-foot container spot rates moving from east to west coast. This, to me, is a little bit of a, I don't know, it's not a concern, but it's a warning sign, because spot rates, of course, are now starting to translate into long-term rates in this space. And this tells me that, a lot of the carriers are able to increase their rates here on concerns, on supply constraints, similar to the truckload space. So limited capacity, we're not seeing huge volume growth. Not over the last bit. What we've had is some news come out around, some of these attacks on some of these ships. And that spiked spot rates overnight, even though demand did not take off. So there's still a lot of risk built into this market. And it looks like a real rough sail moving forward for the maritime space. Do you have any takes here? You read the articles.
I read the articles. When it comes to the Freightos rates, we're actually seeing, I think, it's coming through in the spot side when you compare those two rates. So on the purple line for the Freightos rates, we've got the China to East rates.
East Coast have been stickier because that's the most directly influenced. And then you have the West Coast, which is the Trans-Pacific stuff, which it's an indirect influence from that Strait of Hormuz stuff. So
it is, but I think that tides. We're seeing a recent increase in the spot rates on the Chinese on the China East side, which means that the Panama Canal is actually feeding in through that, because when you have a reduced draft,
well, we don't see it yet. It's not quite there. I think that one's up, and I think that one's up on the news because of the Strait of Hormuz has the most direct influence on that lane itself. The Panama Canal is a forward-looking risk at this point because it hasn't necessarily occurred yet. But I think if shippers start to take this into account as a risk, that could also, give it another couple of weeks, that may actually start to manifest there. The last story that I want to get to is the summer of mini bids for J.B. Hunt. J.B. Hunt, of course, the largest, well, not the largest, but one of the biggest intermodal providers. They have truckload, they have brokerage, 3PL, they have huge dedicated, and a huge intermodal component to their business. They're talking about a lot of businesses coming in with mini bids for intermodal, not for trucking. Normally we hear about this in trucking a lot, but in the context of this story, Stacy Griffin, Senior Vice President of Pricing for Intermodal, said it's the summer of many, many bids, which is where the title comes from, as customers try to mitigate truckload rate hikes. So they're getting some intermodal rates for a short period of time while they're traversing this truckload market. They're trying to avoid the truckload market. This, to me, again, just adds to what we've been talking about in terms of forward-looking risks to this space.
So let me make sure I understand. When we say a mini bid, we're talking about a short-run contract as opposed to a longer-run contract.
It's out of cycle. So traditional bids happen on 12-month-ish, give or take, cycles. They're pretty regular cadence for the most part until something like the truckload market flips. And then you see people say, well, or I mean, carriers do this too. They go to their customers and say, I need a rate increase because the market, I can't keep up. Because like you said, supply stuff has a tough time ramping.
So we're talking about mini bids as a in-between between your traditional spot and contract rates as a way to mitigate risk in a small amount, but not necessarily what you would normally want to do with a normal long-term contract rate.
Right.
So what that's telling us is that the uncertainty is feeding through into mini bids because we don't see the movement to traditional contract, because what's going to turn around and happen is that we've got a very strong supply crunch on the carrier truckload side. They don't want to commit to something that might be too low of a price because let's say that the Mideast goes worse, the prices start going up higher and higher, and they're locked into a lower rate, too low, when they can turn around and compare, get a higher rate on the spot market. So it's kind of the halfway point between contract and spot.
It's a quick hit contract to mitigate stuff. So, you know, we still got a long way to go. There's still a lot of cloudiness over the next 3 to 4 months in this market. It's going to be crucial to stay tuned and obviously watch FreightWaves today, as I encourage you to do tomorrow. Back here at noon, I will have tomorrow off of TV. But DJ, thank you so much for coming out. Thank you all for tuning in. And, you know, we'll see you. I don't know. I think we're going to skip next week because we're going to be in Atlanta.
We will be in Atlanta, so that'll be a fun time.
But we'll be back in a few weeks to check in right before Labor Day. So everybody have a great rest of your week.
Sad we didn't get a chance to go to the